Hi, I'm Joe James. Today we're going to learn how to create HTML forms. So we're going to learn how to add text fields, radio buttons, checkboxes, and a submit button to an HTML form. So each form is going to start out with a standard HTML template where we define the doc type, the open and close HTML tags, and open and close body tags. And all of the code that you see on the succeeding pages is going to go between the open and close body tags. The first line of our code, form name equals register. Each form should have a name, and then we have a close tag for the form. Inside this form, our first field that we're going to put is, we'll have open and closing paragraph tags, and this is just going to show up as plain text on the screen, a prompt for someone to enter their first name. And then this is our input field. The input type is text, which means that the user can type in his own text into this field. And the name, you can name this field anything you want, but whatever you name it is going to be used to retrieve the data from the field in our process page, which you'll see in a minute. So we're going to name this field simply first. And then we're going to have an almost identical line of code for last name, where we just change the prompt to last name and the name of the field to last. So now let's take a look at how our form looks so far in a browser window. So we have a first name block and a last name block. So you can enter data into it, but that's all you can do. So the next thing we want to add is a submit button. So we'll add this at the very bottom. We're going to have open and closing paragraph tags again. We'll add an input type equals submit, and that means that it's a button. We have to give this a name so that we can reference whether or not it's clicked. And the name we'll use is just simply submit. The value that you assign to the button is what is going to, the text that is going to show on the face of the button in the browser. So we want this button to be the sign in button. So this is the text that's going to show on the button. When you have a button, you also need to assign an action. So when that button is clicked, this script will be executed. In other words, you're going to jump to this URL, this page, process1.php. And the method is the method that's going to be used to transfer the data from these form fields to the process page. Because when you jump to a different page, the browser needs to capture this data from these fields and transfer it to the new page. So it's going to use the post method, which you'll understand in a minute. So now we're going to write a script for this process, and we're going to use a standard template. Again, doc type HTML, open and close HTML, and body tags. We're also going to need a open and close PHP tag, and then all of our code for process is going to go between the open and close PHP tags. All of this page is actually going to be PHP code, but it's pretty simple. So our first line of code is simply an if block. So we have an if is set. That means if is clicked, really. The submit button. So if the submit button is clicked, do what's inside of this if block. And this $_ capital post and followed by square brackets, that is the standard syntax for retrieving the value of the field with this name. So this has to be exactly the same as the name that we assign to the button, submit. And then inside the if the button is clicked, we're going to grab the contents of the field with the name first. We're going to assign that to a variable called first name. So we can now do whatever we want with this first name variable. We have this text in this first name variable, and we can use that in PHP however we like. We can save it to a database. In our case, we're just going to print it to the screen. So we'll print first name followed by whatever the user entered for his first name, and then a line break. And we'll do the same thing for last name. So now we have variables for first name and last name. So now let's see how our new form looks in the browser window. Now we have a sign-in button you can see. We can enter a name, we can sign in, and that will take us to the process page, process 1. And all that's doing right now is getting the first name and printing it to the screen, and getting the last name and printing it to the screen. Now the next thing we want to add is a password block. When you enter a password, you typically don't want the characters to show on the screen. They're just going to show as dots. So that's the difference with a password block. So we'll give a prompt password input type equals password. And then again, the name is going to be used to retrieve the contents of this password field in our process page. So we'll just call it PW, as long as we use the same name to retrieve the values on the process page. That's all that matters. And then in our process page, you can see the same PW here. We're going to get the post variable PW, assign it to a variable called password, and then we'll print that to the screen. Now let's take a look at how the password block looks in the browser window. So now we can enter a first name and a password, and then we can sign in, and it's going to get the first name, last name, and our password and show them all on the screen. Typically you wouldn't want to do this, but for educational purposes, I'm just showing you that you can retrieve the password, you can assign it to a variable, you can print to the screen if you want. Now the next thing we want to add to our form is a radio button. We're just going to call this status. So again, we're going to use opening and closing paragraph tags. We have two different choices. The radio button, only one item can be chosen of the available choices. We're going to have two choices. So input, both have the same type equals radio, both have the same name equals status. But we have two different values here, enrolled and not enrolled. Okay, the user is never going to see these values. What the user is going to see is what shows on the screen. This enrolled here or not enrolled. And then we can indicate a default one to be checked. And we're going to default this to enrolled. So enrolled will be checked as a default. So note that our opening and closing paragraph tags goes around both of the choices because we want them both to show up on the same line. Next thing we're going to add is a checkbox. We're going to call our checkbox waitlist. Value equals true, which means that when it is checked, we'll get a true back. And we're going to default it to checked. And then the text we want to show on the screen, add me to the waitlist. So in our process page, we need to add code almost identical to the previous three. We're going to get the status using the post method, assign that to a status variable, print the status to the screen. Get the waitlist, assign that to a waitlist variable, and print the waitlist to the screen. Now let's see how the new radio button and checkbox look in our browser window. So you can see we now have defaulted to enrolled, the status button, and a checkbox, add me to the waitlist, which is defaulted to checked. We can uncheck that if we want. We can change this to not enrolled. Only one of these can be checked at a time in the radio button. And we can add a name, and we can sign in. And now we're getting the password, the status showing as enrolled, and waitlist showing as true. Now if we choose to go back to our form, or if we refresh this page, we notice that these data never go away unless you delete them. So we can fix that. I'll show you how to fix that in a second. So we're going to make some final tweaks to our form. We can add an autocomplete equals off to the opening form tag, and that will turn off the browser from saving the data when you refresh that page. So each time you refresh the page, those fields will all be blank. And then if we want to add a border around our form, we can just add this tag called field set. That adds a border, and the legend will name this form registration, and that completes our form. So let's take a look at the final form. You can see our border now. This is from the field set tag and the registration name. Now we have a fully finished form, and here you can see our final code for the form. And note that this action process.php has to match up to what you name this file for the process script. And this is our final code for the process. That wraps up our video on HTML forms. I'm Joe James. Thank you for watching.